Good morning, everyone. This is Chris Dew with with E1, and I'm the Popdock product manager. I'm excited that we have a little bit of time together today to discuss how we can access all that historical data that you've had in Dynamics NAV all these years, and how we can make that accessible in NetSuite if you are going to that solution. So we're going to dig right in. I got a quick little agenda. We're going to discuss a couple of terms. We're going to kind of talk about an overall strategy on how we can aid you in your migration process. And then we're going to spend the bulk of the time today on viewing the historical data right inside the NetSuite. Okay, I promised a couple of terms. The first one, Azure Data Lake. This is basically a storage account that sits inside of the customer's Azure account. And what it allows us to do is to place all kinds of files in there. So it could be CSV files, it could be image files, JPEGs, it could be PDFs, it could be Word documents, Excel, whatever it is. We can put all kinds of stuff in there, unlike a database, right? Where a database, you typically have to put records in a very specific format called tables. So a data lake is just really a cost-effective way of storing a bunch of stuff in your Azure account. I'll say a couple things about it. Typically, this has been the realm of developers. And so what we always try to do at E1, we try to bring really cool developer tools, and we try to bring them closer to end users so that they can utilize the power without becoming developers. And so that's exactly what we're doing with Popdock, is we're allowing you to both access the data lake and put information into the data lake. So that brings me to the second part, right? We have the Popdock Data Lake upload tool. This is really the tool that's going to allow you to do this without being a developer, that will extract the information from your current NAV system and will allow us to place that into our data lake. And then most importantly, right, it makes it available so that we can now access it later on. So there's a couple terms. We're going to hit them up a few more times today. So I just wanted to get those out there right away. Okay, I think it's helpful to look at our overall migration strategy, because many of you today may, probably have some kind of an on-premise component to your NAV system, right? Many just have a SQL Server that's hosted right on your site, or some of you may have it hosted at a partner's business, or even further, some of you may actually have it hosted on a virtual machine in Azure, AWS, or again, maybe even you're using like Azure SQL. Whatever the scenario is, where we have solutions for you to basically get that information out and utilize it. Now, I want to point out one quick thing here, right, is we're going to be focusing most of the day on Popdock, but just to put a little perspective in, we are focusing on the historical data, right? A lot of the data that does not make it over when you switch to a new system. So we want to make sure you have access to that for the next, 3 years, 7 years, 10 years, however long it's necessary. We want to make sure that you're able to use that information. But we do realize when you are switching systems, some of those master records like customers and vendors and inventory items and accounts and those kinds of things, you may need to have a tool to basically bring those over, maybe transform it a little bit when you're going between systems. Whatever that case is, though, is Smart Connect is a really great tool for moving data between systems. Whereas what we're showing in Popdock is we're going to be archiving that data to a data lake and then making it available in the new system without necessarily bringing it all into the NetSuite structure. So just wanted to kind of get that out there so you have a grasp of really where this all fits into your migration strategy. Okay, so the first part, right, we want to talk about how am I able to access this NAV history right inside of NetSuite. And so we have a couple of different ways, right? We can do lists where we can see just the historical information from NAV, right? So that's all that's in that list. We also may have some scenarios where it makes sense to have a combination of the new stuff in NetSuite combined with the archived NAV data. And so maybe an example is on around vendor payments, or it could be sales orders, seeing all that history, no matter if it came from the new system or the old system. So it's really just those combined lists, or we call it a merge list. It allows us to see all of that, all the information around your customer in one place. We also have the capability of filtering down some of these lists so you're only seeing it for a particular customer or vendor or account or item, whatever it may be. So there's a lot of different ways of you can actually view this information. All right, I think, again, probably enough little talking. Let's actually show you what this might look like right inside of NetSuite. So instead of starting in Popdock, again, let's go right to NetSuite. And if we look at NetSuite here, you'll see I have a Popdock tab. So when I click on this Popdock tab, what I'm getting is, lists of data. This is now, the default list happens to be pulling live NetSuite data. But what we're going to focus on is not just NetSuite or again any of the other systems that we could have inside of there. What I'm focusing on is being able to see this NAV data right inside of here. So if we wanted to see, for example, my vendor ledger entries, I can click on this and you'll see now I'm actually getting the archived NAV companies instead of the NetSuite system that I'm in. And so now it's going to pull all that data from the archived NAV data, and it's still, here's what I want to emphasize, it's still searchable, right? We can still add any columns that we want, right? So if I want to add, the document number and the document date, I can do that. We can move stuff around, right? If we want to move the vendor name to be the first column, if we want to group by vendor, now we're getting kind of something interesting. We're getting subtotals by vendor. So here's our overall total, but you can see if I wanted to expand out American Wood Exports, their subtotal is 119,000. So you have a great way of interacting with it. We can even filter it down, so you can have as many filters as you like inside of here. Just keep mashing on that button, and again, pick whatever columns that you want that are on that NAV list. So there's just a quick little example of being able to see all that information. Again, we could switch between vendor entries, and we could go over to the customer side of things if we wanted. And now we're pulling all of the history for the customers now. But where I think it gets kind of interesting is when you want to see it on an individual card. So, well, let me say this slightly different way, right? This in this case, this customer dashboard, or it could be the customer page. I can have this embedded right here, and then again, instead of pulling all of the transactions, for example, I can now just see the ones that I have for just this one customer. So then it's filtered down, and I'm seeing just their information in one place. So just to give you a couple little ideas of how you can use that information. Okay, so let's step back into, now that you've seen that we have data embedded inside of NetSuite, and it's a pretty easy way of doing that. Let's get into how do we connect to this data so that we can extract that information and make it accessible. So one of the first points I'd like to make is that you are running this tool. It will run on your own premises, right? So it doesn't require anything like a gateway or a special utility to open up your network, right? You don't have to put a hole in the firewall. So there's no security concerns there. So that's one of the biggest things, right? Is when we're connecting to the data, is that you don't have to worry about that, because everything is happening on your network. The other two things I'm going to kind of put together is we can grab all of the NAV tables. So this is kind of important because it's not just NAV tables, right? It's anything, any third parties, right? If you've had some customizations that you've done or other ISV products, we're able to get at all those tables, and even if you have custom tables in there, we'll pull all that information no matter where it's coming from. But more importantly, I think, is how people actually use this data. We are going to bring in the NAV lists. And what does that mean? Well, you can kind of think of it this way. We've pulled in the meaningful information together for you. So say, for example, if we have a sales order lines that you want to see that information, but it's not entirely useful by itself, right? We might need some information from the header, and we might need some information from the customer, and maybe some information from the item. So all of a sudden, there's 5 different tables it could be coming from. So we're pulling that stuff together so you have one list that has all of the things that you need instead of looking in 5 different places. So those we have, we're just kind of working through some of the QA on that right now, and so that is something I'm really excited about, just to make it a little bit easier. But I kind of think of when we move all the tables, I kind of think of that as the insurance policy, meaning that if you ever needed to, you could go to any of those pieces of information and show it right inside of Popdock, and again, right inside of NetSuite if you needed to. The lists are really probably the ones that you're going to use on a day-to-day basis. Okay. So now that we have connected to the data on your network, we also need to move it to the data lake. And so again, the tool that's going to do that, the Popdock Data Lake upload tool, is going to run inside of your environment. And a couple key pieces, it is not required to be on that SQL server. So it doesn't need to be on that server. It doesn't need to be on a server. It could be on a workstation instead, but it needs to be on your network so that it has access to connect to that SQL server. The other part is when we're looking at moving the data, there's a couple of key areas that will affect how quickly this can be done. We have a really efficient process, but the limitations we run into when we do this are extracting the data out, right? So basically running SQL statements to get the data out of your SQL server. And so what slows that down? Well, if you have a 10 gigabyte database, right, we're talking minutes. If you have 100 gigabytes of data, we're talking hours. If you have a terabyte of data, we might be getting more than, more than, well, potentially close to a day, right? So we're still talking hours, but it could actually potentially get into days if you have a huge amount of data. And again, it also depends on how fast the machine is that's running, all those SQL statements. So that's one part of the equation. The other part is after we've extracted it, we're immediately moving it to the data lake. So the constraint there is really that as fast as we can upload it, and not everybody has the same upload speeds, depending on if you're doing it from home or on your corporate network. You might have faster or slower upload speeds. So that is going to be one area too, right? Is we can only upload it as fast. So if you have a terabyte of data that we have to upload, it's going to take longer than obviously something that's just a few gigabytes. And then this interface provides a mechanism for us to fix errors that are that may arise, right, in whatever scenario that comes up. So I want to go right now and I want to show you what does this tool look like and get used to that. Okay. So if we start here, you'll see the first thing we do is we log into our Popdock account. So I'll go ahead and do that. And then we're going to be picking an Azure Data Lake that we have set up inside of Popdock. So I have one for NAV called ADL NAV. I'm picking that container, and then here we go. So we are connected to that. Now this next part, this is where we're connecting on-premise. So we're connecting to our SQL server. Again, yours probably won't look exactly like mine since I have made mine externally facing, but yours might just say, SQL Server 1 or whatever, SQL Server ERP or SQL NAV or something like that. So whatever that is, it'll be your on-premise server address. Port 1433 is standard. The NAV database, right? The Dynamics NAV database, whatever you called it. So I have a bunch of different versions that we've run this testing on. I'm showing you NAV 2018 today. That is where all of my companies and tables exist. Then you'll connect with a SQL user and password. And the key to this is it doesn't need to be SQL, but it does need to have access to both the database, the tables in it, and then probably more importantly, the sys objects, so that we can pull all the metadata about all of those fields that come over. Okay, so finally I connect here, and this is what I'll see when I pick all of the tables, right? We're gonna basically have all of the companies inside of here, and so I'm able to basically extract this out and say, you know what, I actually don't want, this is maybe the one I don't want to archive today, right? This is maybe a test database or something like that, or test company that you no longer use. So you have some control over which ones. And then really the next part, I'm actually just gonna do one for this, this run, just to make it a little bit faster. But then what you'll see is it starts cranking through the process. It'll tell us that sounds like there's about 1,400 tables in this US company. It'll tell you how many are remaining. That's the pending. It'll tell you how many have been completed. It'll tell you how many are skipped. So why is it skipping some of these? It is doing that because there is no data in these tables. So it's basically saying, hey, you know what? There's no need to throw an empty table or 1,000 empty tables up there. Let's only move the ones that actually have some data in them. Now there is one more status. If we ever run into any problems in here, we'll actually get something that says it's that it failed. And so we'll see that, you know, how many have failed in this process as well. Okay, so while this is cranking away, let me show you just a couple more things while we're waiting for that to finish up. If I go back to Popdock now, what I want you to understand is that if we go ahead and if I go into this interface, for example, we can actually see that in this case, I have a list of data coming from that data lake that I had done the other day, and I have basically, it looks like all of the customers and grouped by city. So if we went into London, for example, I think they have more than one. I can see here's all the customers that are in London, but now we're interacting with the data lake that we've just pushed up from there. So let me show you what does that actually look like. If I pull up the data lake connector, what we'll see inside of here is it, well, okay, today I only have 3 lists inside of here. It's adding all these archive files to the data lake, and we can add them right from here. This will show me all of basically the tables that are being extracted and put up there. But what we'll see when we have the lists part is it'll automatically put all the lists. So your customers, your customer ledger entries, your sales orders, your vendors, all those kinds of things. We'll see those as default lists. We'll also have our companies will be inside of here so that we can see which companies have been placed inside of there. And again, most importantly, is we now have the capability of adding this to our list that goes right inside of NetSuite. So what does that mean? Well, let me show you this other area. It's called, this example. So if I go to my NetSuite, this is one of the things I have embedded in NetSuite. And so you'll see I have a group of all my lists. So we talked about the NAV migration, right? Is that I can quickly just hit add lists and I can pull any list that I want from that data lake. So if we go, I should have at least one in here. There we go. So here's some in the NAV migration, right, that we put out here. So here's all of our customer ledger entries and vendor ledger entries and stuff like that. So that's how easy it is to just add, a brand new list. We just pointed to the migration area. And again, if we're pulling it from our data lake, we just add the list from the data lake, and then I could say, hey, I want table customer one. And so that's really how simple it is to interact with the data once we have it to the data lake. Okay, we can see the process has completed. And if we go sort by the status, looks like we have all ones that have no records or all success. So we don't have any that failed on this example. But if we did, what I want to show you is, like, let's say this account entity setup in here. Let's say that this was supposed to have some records in there, and maybe we had a bad calculation in a field or something like that, and we went and fixed it. I can click this button and I can choose to rerun this. And so then what it would do is it would rerun just that one table that we had problems with before, and then do something. Again, nothing, I didn't change anything, so obviously I had the exact same message as before. But just so that you know, we have that retry logic in there, and then we also allow you to go back and look at the logs too, so you can see why something failed or worked. Okay, well, that was just a real quick, tour through this tool, but I think you'll find it's a really powerful, easy to use for end users, as again, opposed to being a developer, to make this data not only extracted from NAV, but make it accessible inside of NetSuite. So a couple wrap-up points here. This tool will allow you to securely connect to your Dynamics NAV data without compromising the firewall or poking any holes in there. We can quickly and easily move that to an Azure Data Lake without a developer. So now it's just a very quick process that Popdock handles everything for you. And the most important part, right, is if it's only so good to get the data out, you also need to be able to report on that information. And so we not only allow you to report on it inside of the Popdock web application, we actually bring it right to NetSuite, which is your new system, so you don't ever have to leave NetSuite, and you can still see all of that history. Okay, so I'd love to answer any questions that we have that have popped up today, and we'll get through as many of them as we can. Okay, first one in here is, how much does a data lake cost? Okay, very good point. We didn't spend too much time on it. It is really a cost-effective solution. So let me give you a couple of real-world examples. For most people that have under 100 gigabytes of archive data inside of there, it's going to cost you less than $20 a month. For people that, if you're getting into terabytes, it might just might cost you a little bit more than that as you have that, but most of it is, the storage cost is pretty reasonable. It's really more about the transactions. So if you have to access it just frequently, you might have a few more costs than if you had, you're only hitting it a couple times a day. So whatever your usage scenario, but for most people, I would say it's probably going to be under $20 a month. Okay, I got another question asking which NAV versions this tool will work for. So this will basically work for any SQL version of NAV. So we can go back and pull all that information, extract all the tables out. Now, some of the list capabilities, probably that's going to be more in like the 2013 on up, because there's some pretty big changes on some of the lists before then. But again, there's some potential that could even go back just a little bit further. I'll just mention this too, for non-SQL versions, we've done a couple of these already. We don't have the tool to extract it out, so you'll have to do the extraction to CSV through other methods I think that you could do right inside of NAV. But then we can actually upload those CSV files to the data lake and again, make those accessible in NetSuite as well. Okay. I got another question. Could I see Salesforce information inside of NetSuite? Yes, that's again a little different than what we talked about here, but absolutely, I did actually just briefly hover over it when we were inside the main NetSuite application, where I had information coming from a couple of different areas. So that's what Popdock allows you to do, is bring information from other systems right where you work. So if you're going to spend your day inside of NetSuite, we can bring you the historical data, which is what we talked about, but we can also bring information from external systems like Salesforce, or it could be coming from e-commerce systems or HR payroll systems, whatever it is, we can bring all that information in. Okay, I think that's all for questions today. So thank you for your time, everyone, and have a great rest of your day. If you do have any additional questions, please email sales@e1solutions.com, and we'd be happy to track down the right people to answer. Thank you and have a great day.